It appears the stakes are pretty high for the Judicial Service Commission in its interviews this week because the Constitutional Court has a vacancy it has to fill. Once again, not really enough candidates to fill them. 4 people have been nominated, are being interviewed for a position on the Constitutional Court. The Constitution says the JSC must send the names of 4 candidates to the President. This means the JSC now has to send all of the names of the people it's interviewed forward, or it can say 1 or 2 of the candidates are not suitable and therefore have not enough names and have to start the entire process again. Mbekezeli Benjamin is from the organisation Judges Matter. Mbekezeli, good afternoon to you. I mean, why does this keep happening? Why are there just not more candidates for the Constitutional Court? If I was a lawyer, I would take a nomination.
Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to the viewers. You're quite right. A spot or a job on the Constitutional Court should be one of the most prestigious jobs in the world. Every lawyer in South Africa should be aspiring one day to be a justice of the Constitutional Court. And it's quite sad, actually, that we are not seeing enough credible people put themselves forward to be justices of the Constitutional Court. And really the fault for this lies largely with the JSC itself. Some people have been quite honest to say, I would never put myself forward to a process where I stand to be humiliated, I stand to be asked questions that have nothing to do with my suitability to be a justice, but actually have to do with other issues unrelated to the process. And so that is the criticism that the JSC has faced over the last couple of years. They are, to their credit, turning a corner with the new criteria and the gradual improvement of the interviews, but they're still far from gaining the confidence of people to put themselves forward.
I suppose the other thing is also, if you're going through any kind of test or any kind of process to get appointed to a position, you need to know how you are going to be assessed so that you can do well. If you're going to do a driver's test, you need to know that you can drive left and right and where your blind spots are, and you'll be tested on those things. This issue of criteria, it's been such a hot issue for a long time. Candidates didn't really know how they were being judged. And from what you've said in the past, there's evidence actually that commissioners just made up their own mind, based really on nothing.
Yes, absolutely. That has been the weak point in this interview process, that the JSC didn't have any criteria or guidelines or measures on which they assessed the candidates. And in fact, we did a research study where we looked at the interviews of candidates from between 2015 and 2019. So we looked at about 40 different candidates. We looked at all the interview transcripts, and what our research found was that the variation of the questions, the variation of the time allocated, and the issues that are taken up with the different candidates were so huge that one candidate was interviewed for 3 minutes, another candidate was interviewed for 113 minutes for the same position. So that fundamentally tells you that the process is unfair. And that is something that we've been saying that JSC should remedy, and should remedy fast. And like I said, luckily, as from April last year, they did put in place written criteria. The key test now is how far they follow that criteria and they focused on the real issues.
Well, I mean, haven't there been promises to follow criteria before? And isn't that the risk, is that someone might go for an interview and not really know if that's what they're going to do?
Well, yes, that has been the criticism in the past, but the interviews, I can comfortably say the interviews since April of last year, October of last year, and even in this round, they've been much more improved than the ones in the past. So the interview stage of the process has been rigorous. It has focused on people's experiences. It has focused on their qualifications and their suitability to be judges. The key weakness that I still see in the process is that when it comes to the deliberation stage, when the JSC goes in private and debates the qualities of the candidates, there's not enough reference to the criteria. And which is why last year we saw there were 10 candidates available, 4 positions available, but the JSC decided not to fill the 2 positions. So that, for us, is the key witness that the JSC still needs to fix, which is not a huge problem, actually. It's a small problem to fix, but it still needs to be fixed nonetheless.
This time around, several of the candidates are not actually judges, and this is legal. It was actually always there. It goes all the way back to the founding of our Constitution. It's also fairly rare. It does happen in other countries. I think Germany is an example. Is it a good move to do this, to bring in people who are not judges?
The short answer is yes, it is a good move, especially at the level of the Constitutional Court, where you don't just need people with experience in the courts, but you need people who have a deep understanding of the law, who have thought about the law in a very abstract sense, who've actually created new theories about the law. And you need that kind of experience to be infused at the Constitutional Court, because the Constitutional Court is really supposed to deal with only the big questions of the law. It's supposed to answer those hard and difficult questions about how the Constitution should be interpreted, what are the limits of the powers of the President or the powers of Parliament. Those big questions need a big thinker. And so some of what the academics have an advantage of is that they have been for their whole career thinking about some of these big constitutional questions. So you do need them on the Constitutional Court, and which is why even the Constitution itself, it says that it requires only 4 of the 11 members of the Constitutional Court to have been judges before they were appointed to the Constitutional Court. That means 7 or possibly 7 of the members of the Constitutional Court could have come from legal practice. They could have come from universities as law professors. They don't necessarily need to have been judges.
It's interesting because I would imagine, on the other hand, I would think if I look at a constitutional court, there must be nothing like the experience being in a busy high court gives you as a judge. You'll have a wide variety of cases, civil disputes involving, I don't know, fights between political candidates and their political parties ahead of an election in some cases. You'll have other disputes that are criminal cases. The very stuff of life goes through our high courts and our magistrates' courts, I must just say. So, I mean, I'd hate to see a situation where we don't have many people with that experience in our court. It's still quite important, isn't it?
Well, it is vitally important. Look, for you to be an effective judge, you really need to know how the system works. And I suppose this is why the Constitution itself made it mandatory, made it compulsory that 4 members of the Constitutional Court must have been judges. That is so that we ensure that we have people with real-life experience of how the courts function. But at the same time, the Constitution itself envisages that because the court, the Constitutional Court, is such a special court that deals with big questions, like I said, you do need to draw from a wider variety of experiences than just those who have been in court. And in fact, because the Constitutional Court is the last word on many of these legal questions, you do need to bring the best of the best in the legal profession to come in. And that is why there is this requirement for even law professors to make themselves available.
There's so many other things that are happening in this space at the moment, and I suppose we shouldn't be surprised, Mbekezeli, if we look at all of the pressure we've seen in our judges. And you've actually said publicly in the last week or so that through this entire year, so the 9th of April, we're into the second quarter of the year, the Constitutional Court still has to issue a judgment. They haven't issued any judgments at all.
Yes, that for us is a worrying thing, that in 2024, we are already in April, the second quarter of the year, the Constitutional Court has not issued a single judgment. This is unprecedented, because if you compare it to 2023, by this time last year, there were 10 judgments out. In 2022, there were 13 judgments out. So the Constitutional Court seems to be underperforming this year, and that for us is a little bit of a worry, because that tells us that the Constitutional Court maybe is not moving as quickly as it should. And in fact, part of the theme that has dominated the interviews both yesterday and today is about the efficiency of the Constitutional Court and how quickly it can do its work. So it is a little bit of a worry. Of course, we must also understand that the court is really dealing with very complex work. So some of that work will not be able to be done in a short space of time. It does require a bit of time, but it is worrying that up to April of this year, we haven't received a single judgment.
Mbekezeli Benjamin from Judges Matter, thanks very much indeed.